Hi everyone! Welcome back to the TechMaki channel. Today we're going to continue the creation of our repository. The repository is a generic implementation that is going to, in this case, use RavenDB. We are going to integrate in this video with our products API. But before we start, if you like the content, please click on the subscribe button and also on the notifications in order to receive information as soon as I publish new content. And if you have already done that, please share this with your friends and colleagues so you can help me spread this free content, alright? Okay, so let's go! In the startup, I'm going to do here services.add singleton. And why I'm actually choosing singleton? Because I want just one instance of this class for the whole menu service solution. So I don't want, for example, to create every time there is a request, I create a new repository. I want to have only a single instance of this repository that is actually going to be used for every change that we do in the RavenDB. Some other solutions, like for example, Entity Framework, does not allow actually singletons when accessing the database. That's not the case in RavenDB, and that's not the case also in MongoDB. Okay, so here we're going to basically define a simple singleton. And the singleton is going to here be declared a little bit differently. So we are going to put like RavenDB repository, right? And we need to specify that this is a generic class. And the way that we specify this is by putting exactly RavenDB repository here. Let me see what I'm doing wrong. Probably, yeah, iRepository, sorry. It's just iRepository in this case. Yep, so great. This iRepository here, and I'm putting inside of the parentheses because they need to come as parameters, and we need to put the types of these generic classes using this format over here. So type of, and then we specify the type. This is going to be the first parameter. If you take a look at add singleton, you specify basically the interface type, and now you specify the concrete implementation class. So RavenDB repository. Okay, let's see what's going on here. Yes, it's expecting for me to kind of use the tmaki menu controllers, but what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to get back here to the controller, move this interface. Let's just use the refactor here. So I'll move these to iRepository.cs, and let's create a folder in our solution. This folder is going to be called persistence. So basically this is the generic persistence. I'll move iRepository to this area. I'll also move RavenDB repository to this area, and the RavenDB context as well. What's going on? Oh, okay, it's saying that it's a partial class. That's the confusion over here. It's not a partial class, it's just the interface. All right, and here it's tmaki.menu.persistence. And for the RavenDB context, it's the same thing. Let's define here the namespace, just like we did here. Let's just copy and paste. So namespace is going to be tmaki menu.persistence. All right, let's define it over here. And format. I use it in Visual Studio, Ctrl-KD, okay, to format my code. Then we have that in a single namespace. And finally, for the repository, RavenDB repository, it's not actually a partial class. .persistence. All right, Ctrl-KD. It's formatting again. Let's see. All right. Let me close this. All right. Perfect. So we don't need the tmaki.menu.persistence, and we have the RavenDB repository, and we have the iRepository in their own classes inside of the persistence folder. All right, so now we have everything kind of in place. Let's go back to the startup and make sure that we have these types here using tmaki.menu.persistence. Then we have everything that we need. We have the two singletons. We have the iRepository with the concrete implementation RavenDB repository. They are two generic classes. And one is an interface, the other one is a class, a concrete implementation. And we have the iRavenDB context and the RavenDB context. So now inside of the controller, let's put on the constructor. Instead of putting the iRavenDB context, because we don't need now to have the direct usage of RavenDB context in our controller. We just need now to use the repository. So let's just define it, iRavenDB repository, right? And it's a generic class. But this is the moment where we are going to specify what is the data model that we're going to use. So here, the class that we're going to use is going to be called product, okay? So this product class still does not exist, so I'm going to create it over here. Product class, it's over here, it's empty still. And let's just make sure that we have the using tmaki.menu.persistence. Okay, as we imported the tmaki.menu.persistence. All right, perfect. So then we have basically the repository here, and let's receive the iRepository, which is generic, right? We are receiving here, and it is a iRepository of product. So this is the moment where we are actually defining what is the data type that we are going to handle, that we're going to work with. And then let's call it repository over here. Just put it over here and repository as well. All right, so now we have basically the iRepository product. Let's just use the same interface here because there is no problem. And then basically we have the injected instance of the repository. All right, so now let's do the following. First, we need to answer a question. Why are we using product instead of the product to get? That is the class that we created here inside of our controller. And I'm going to explain why. We are trying to follow as much as possible the single responsibility principle. And the single responsibility principle means that we need to make sure that every class has the less coupling possible. It actually has a single purpose of existence. So for example, in this case, the product to get is the response that we are sending when we make the API call. So we make the API call and then we are returning the products for that consumer. And this is different from actually the data model that is used to persist on the database. Because in the future, today it's going to be the same thing, almost the same thing. But in the future, we may have situations where, for example, there are more data inside of the document that is persisted in RavenDB than what we actually want to respond when a user asks for the list of products, right? Because the list of products that the consumer of the API is asking may have less data or even more data, like for example, some calculated information that are not relevant at all to the data model that is persisted in the RavenDB database. So this is why it is very important to keep two separate classes, one for the data model and the other one for the API responses or the API requests. We also need to make sure that our customers are going to have very stable APIs that do not change a lot, because otherwise he's going to create like an integration with your API. And then if your API keeps changing, like removing properties, adding new structures and everything without separating and communicating that appropriately, then you're also going to have a lot of problem and nobody will want to consume your APIs, okay? So this is also another concern that we need to take into consideration. All right, so now let's define the structure of our product to get. So it's basically the same for now, okay? So let's define this product class and then let's do the following. As soon as we get a request to return the products by the ID, let's do the following. Let's remove this code over here, and then we're going to do repository dot get product ID, and basically it will return a product. And this is the product that we will return to the customer, but we need to convert this to a product to get. So basically, we're going to create new product to get. and then do the following. Image path equals to product.imagePath. Name is going to be name product.name. Price, product.price. Product ID is going to be product.product ID. And finally, text is going to be product.text. Specifically for the ID, one convention that RavenDB uses is that if you specify the property as ID only, it's going to automatically recognize that as the primary identification of your document. So let's make this change so we make sure that RavenDB will use the convention in order to know the ID. So I'm going to basically change this to ID. The I needs to be uppercase and the D lowercase. So I'm going to make this change and also come here and adjust to use ID. You see, this is one great example of why we want to keep this separation, because for our data model, it makes sense to be an ID because RavenDB has this requirement. But when it comes to the API, we want to make sure that we have autonomy to define, for example, product ID. Okay, so in this case, let's just finish this implementation and return the product to get. All right, so now we are ready to test. Okay, so before the video, I started the RavenDB database, the menu that we created on the last video, and then I inserted two documents there. One is the product number 1, and the other one is the product number 2. So let's show them. Yep. So here are the data that we have just saved. So this is the data that we will consume from our API. So let me select first the product 1, the ID, and this is the ID that we're going to use on the Swagger UI to retrieve our product. Okay, but before we actually start, let me do one quick thing that was missing here in this Swagger UI. I'm going to go to UI inside of the Swagger UI, okay? And I'm going to set route prefix to be empty. This means that when we start the system, we are going to start the initial page, which is the local host, right? Without any prefix there, like any specific URL of any API. And in the home page, it's going to load the Swagger user interface. Okay, so that's the way that we can do to allow the Swagger to run in the root page. Okay, so let's just make one more check here. In the launch settings, we need also to make sure that we are starting as the first page, not a specific service, like for example, this weather forecast. I'm going to remove that and leave it empty. So then by default, it starts just localhost with the port that is the default port that is defined in the IIS settings. All right, so other than this, let's see what else we're missing. I think it's okay. We can also delete the weather forecast because we don't need this weather forecast anymore. Let's delete this weather forecast also from here. Let's just make sure that we move the product to get outside. I'll move to product to get class. Then, as we don't need this weather forecast anymore, I'm going to delete it. Here we are missing Swagger in the beginning. Okay, so we need to specify Swagger v1 swagger.json. That's the format that we need to specify. Okay, so after we do this, because that's the path where the Swagger JSON file is located, and then that's what the user interface uses in order to render the APIs. So let's start the IIS Express and see the result. All right, so now we have the get product API. Let's take a look. I'm going to get the ID from the RavenDB. So let's copy the ID from RavenDB. Let's go back here and then try it out. I'll click in try it out. I'll specify the product ID and hit execute. All right, so here is the content that we were looking for. It has just retrieved the product 1 with price 10, text 20, and an image that I specified in the database. Let's check if it's the same information that we have in RavenDB. Yes, that's exactly the same data. We have the price 10, text 20, and basically the description product 1 and the name product 1. So this is how we implemented a generic repository class and also connected that to our controller. So then we can call the API and return the data directly from the database. Alright, so that's all for this video. In the next video, we're going to see how to basically put all the implementation of our repository and the data access layer inside of a class library and make it available in the NuGet so other projects can use it as a library. Don't forget to subscribe. I hope to see you again on the next video.